alcoholic beverages as well as household contents and services. SEIFSA Chief Economist Tafadzwa Chibanguza is optimistic that the strengthening trajectory of the rand is positive on inflation and on the inflation outlook. He's here with us in the studio and we welcome you.
Thanks, Colin.
All right, perhaps you can elaborate on the outlook of inflation and what you make out of this figure.
All right. So I think the first thing we make out of it is the fact that really what CPI is measuring is the price pressure on consumers. So a trajectory where it's easing naturally means that there's less pressure on consumer balance sheets than allowing them to do many other things, right? So for those industries, for example, like ourselves, why we look at this with particular interest is that we have industries where the final demand is derived from the consumer balance sheet, right? So you talk things like the steel that goes into cars, our aluminium companies, the steel stuff that goes into cans. I know I'm talking very small products, but the idea is that easing consumer inflation and eases then puts less pressure on consumer balance sheets, and then naturally that's why it was a welcome move for in our sense. So the trajectory to your question and our expectation, we've seen it starting to ease largely because of the exchange rate, as you just mentioned a few minutes ago. And when I left the office, I saw the exchange rate, it just keeps going stronger. I mean, before I left, it's at about $12.50. You look at Brent crude, about $50 a barrel as well. And the two would then continue to put downward pressure on inflation. So we welcome the move, definitely.
So like it's a mixed bag of both internal and exogenous factors. Mm-hmm. Now let's start home. Mm-hmm. We've had the current account deficit figure coming out yesterday, and correct, it was actually a figure that surprised many economists. What did you make out of it?
Again, that was a surprise that when we looked at the number, and what a current account is really measuring is how much of outside money or how much exposure to the outside then do we have. In doing so, what that then shows us is that with the current account having improved as it had done, it was a result of the fact that we're exporting more than we're importing. Maybe let me start there. I think I'm just backtracking. Now, in doing so, that then shows us that the economy is at a relatively stable position at the current point where it is now, and a welcome move. I think that's what one can sum from that, to say it was definitely a welcome move.
Then referring to other external factors, since Donald Trump's win, it looks like there has been a shake-up in the market, especially emerging markets and currencies. Would you point it to the inward-looking attitudes of Donald Trump's policies?
Partly so, but I think before that, I would even put it first to the amount of uncertainty that he's creating, because you will see one day he promises a R1 trillion investment package. No one knows how, $1 trillion rather, investment package that he'll inject into the economy that no one knows where he'll get the money from. So you've seen such a volatile policy environment coming from him, and I think it's probably all his tweets and everything he says behind the podium that has many people looking into that. So the uncertainty that he's then created has then led a lot of a type of risk on. So a lot of people then buying the rand, seeing the rand as a better place to store your money purely because of that uncertainty. Naturally then that inward-looking approach is part of this policy uncertainty where no one knows what actually is going on.
Which brings us to the pressure that Janet Yellen and the Fed would be having when we look at the outlook. Then would you say that with the MPC meeting next week and with the propensity of the Fed increasing interest rates, what then would that do to pressure the consumer? Would that be on the upside?
I think, you know what was surprising for me last week when we saw Janet Yellen and them increase their interest rate by about 0.25 basis points, the rand continued its strengthening trajectory, right? So it shows you that the fundamentals are seemingly now just broader than the US and what we'll see out come out of the US. Coming to next week, our expectation, and in fact in the note that we put out yesterday at SEIFSA, we said that the rand is actually doing a lot of work for the MPC in the sense that the stronger rand decreases inflation, and the main variable that the central bank tries to target is consumer inflation. So the rand strengthening, dropping inflation, naturally that's translating positively to the outlook for inflation, downward, of course, downward variation in the consumer price inflation. So what we expect next week, and this is our view at SEIFSA, is for the central bank, the MPC committee, to keep the rates on hold, because we feel that all the dynamics at this point warrant for maintaining it on hold at this point.
Okay, now just to wrap it up, when we bring it closer to home in the steel industry, what do you think about this downward variation could have an impact on the industry?
It's indirect, right? Because this is really measuring consumer price inflation. It's indirect in the sense that for us, I think I mentioned at the beginning of our chat, is that some of our products, things like cans that goes into beverages, so that's our aluminium guys, steel that goes into cars, and just general rubber products that go into households. That demand is ultimately derived by the consumer balance sheet. So less pressure then on the consumer balance sheet through inflation naturally then translates favorably to us. So it's an indirect kind of effect that we expect. But those industries that are most exposed to consumer balance sheet would then obviously, hopefully, see some increasing propensity in the demand for their product, because the consumer balance sheet is healthier.
All right, Tafadzwa Chibanguza, who is the chief economist at SEIFSA, talking to us about his analytical perspective on the outlook of inflation, especially consumer price inflation. And when we move on to other news now, workers at Harmony Gold Kusasa Mine have embarked on an illegal strike, and management says that the illegal strike is in response to the suspension of AMCU's branch leadership. This after they encouraged a go slow at the mine.